Well, shalom, this is Pastor Jim. Welcome to Word Pictures in Ancient Hebrew. In this edition, we're going to continue looking at the pieces of armor that the Apostle Paul refers to in Ephesians chapter 6. As we do that, we want to discover exactly what motivated him to do this, and then what he was thinking about as he described all these different pieces of armor. And I contend that he was thinking in Hebraic terms, not Greek terms. And therefore, we're going to take these words that we find in the New Testament in the book of Ephesians, and we're going to trace them back through the Septuagint to Hebrew words that would have been prevalent in Old Testament times. And then furthermore, we're going to transpose them into ancient Hebrew, which was a pictograph language, so that we can discover fundamentally what they were expressing when they were used by people of that cultural time and setting. And so as we do this, I think it's going to be a tremendously interesting journey. I go into the book of Ephesians, where the Apostle Paul talks about these things. He says in verse 10, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God." And when he does that, he then refers to in verse 14, having put on the breastplate of righteousness. Now, we saw last time he talked about the helmet of salvation. Now he's going to talk about the breastplate of righteousness. It's interesting that these two items he picks up from the Old Testament, but he adds to them. And as he does that, he points out twice in this short teaching that he does that he wants us to put on the whole armor. Once again, in verse 13, he says, "Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand, therefore, having girded your waist with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness." So he's going to take those two fundamental pieces that he found somewhere, and observing the Roman guards that obviously he spent time watching while he was incarcerated, he's going to expand to this full panoply of warfare implements that they carry with them. So where does that come from? Well, Isaiah chapter 59 says this. And by the way, Rabbi Shaul would certainly have studied these things as he was a younger man and studying to be a rabbi before he became the Apostle Paul. Isaiah 59:16 says, "Therefore his own arm," this is referring to God, "brought salvation for him, and his own righteousness, it sustained him. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and a helmet of salvation on his head." Now, these are two implementations of war when they're used in the physical. However, we find that the Apostle Paul follows a principle that he explains in 1 Corinthians 15:46, where he says the spiritual is not first, but the physical comes first, and then it's followed by a spiritual meaning. So we have to understand the physical meanings first, and then we can fully understand the fundamental way that the spiritual application works. So let's look at the breastplate of righteousness. Shiryan Zedekah. Marla Jean has already talked to you about righteousness, Zadik, and it simply means being hooked on, pursuing, or following the pathway, the road that God has established for us. And that's what he's called us to do. We have discovered that we can't do that in our own righteousness, that we have to depend upon his. And so therefore this breastplate becomes very interesting. What is this talking about? Well, the root word in this word shiryan would be the shin and the resh, and it speaks of twisting or separating and working by man. And what happened was the principle that they would use in those times to create rope, which then they would create a breastplate out of, would be to twist two strands in opposite directions and then to twine them. And as they did that, they created a very strong and tough material. And then they would put those together to develop a coat of armor, a breastplate, if you will. And that breastplate was very interesting because this word tells us that will then, for man, provide the strength, the power, the armor to establish, to protect his life. Nun, that's the Yod, Vav, Nun that we see there. And so the picture, the word picture for this idea of a breastplate is something that's been twisted, it's been developed with power and with strength. It's been crafted so that when it's put together, it then provides a protection that separates the man that's wearing it from the evil that's trying to attack him. Therefore, it preserves his life. It's in the word picture. It's really beautiful. And so as we look at that, we go to the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and we find out that there's a real deep spiritual meaning here. In verse 8, it says, "But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love as a helmet of hope and salvation." So the elements that we're supposed to use to create our breastplate, to twist it and to form it and to term it, are faith and love. Those are the things that we have been called to work on so that we can develop the breastplate of righteousness, whereby we can be separated from the evil of the world and God can protect us through His love, His protection, and through His righteousness. Wow, what an awesome word. Isn't it great to look into the depth of these words and find the fundamental meaning of them? Well, thanks. Thanks for joining me once again at Word Pictures for Ancient Hebrew, and we'll be back shortly to continue talking about the different armor pieces that the Apostle Paul speaks of in the book of Ephesians chapter 6. Until then, shalom.